Hi everyone, I am a PhD student. Today I'm gonna talk about 5 things no one tells you about when you start PhD. If you're new to this channel and this is the first video you saw, remember to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell notification because I'm gonna to be putting out videos about PhD, about content creation, everything that I've learned over the past years, and I love to you to consume all of it. Alright, let's get on with the 5 things that I wish someone had told me before I started my PhD. So the first thing is, and probably the most important, is that your supervisor will determine how nice your PhD time is. Now, I am incredibly fortunate because I didn't do a lot of research on my supervisor, but my supervisor is fantastic. He is a seasoned professional when it comes to helping students in the lab. My supervisor always have time for me, always have regular meetings with me, and always get my PhD and reports revision back to me incredibly quickly. But that isn't always the case. I've heard that certain PhD supervisors expect love from their PhD students, and that includes coming on weekends, early morning lab meeting, and then also just being completely absent for the majority of their PhD. And look, for some students that's absolutely fine for some students, because there are some people really like that they've got the freedom, and some people don't like to be micromanaged, but some people need micromanaging. So the accountability between you and your PhD supervisor will completely determine how successful and fun and nice your PhD time is. So please choose widely. The second thing is that it's incredibly competitive. It's something that I wasn't completely aware of when I got into PhD. Honestly, for me, it was a path of least resistance. For me, a PhD seemed to be the easiest thing. I did well in my undergraduate. Sure, why not do PhD in hindsight? Not the best way to choose a PhD, but nonetheless, that was my path to do a PhD. It's competitive on a number of levels. The first one is that is competitive within your research group. If you've got a large research group, I've even heard stories of supervisors employing two students on the same project and seeing whichever one gets me the results first gets a PhD. That is insane. That is really horrible way to do any sort of PhD stuff. So yeah, I've heard of that, and it can be super competitive in the lab and with your peers. There's always this thing about competing each other in terms of amount of time that you've been at the bench, the amount of time you spend in the lab. So sometimes it's expected that you spend your life in the lab until you get your PhD. That is insane to me. Get a balanced work life, but yes, some supervisors expect that you're there all the time, and also it's competitive outside. So the academic system awards people for producing peer-reviewed papers, and that relates to your H-index. And the H-index is the number of peer-reviewed papers you have within that number of citations, and that number, that H-index, will dictate your entire career, if you give clever people system to manipulate, they will manipulate that system and gain it, of course. That will happen, and so that all feeds into the competitiveness. People want a high H index. They produce paper, they gain the system, they get their name on papers that they didn't really contribute to. All of that is absolutely outrageous, but it's reality of academia and doing a PhD. So the third thing that I was unaware of and no one told me about was the fact that peer reviewed papers are so very important and ultimately dictate whether or not you're successful in an academic career or not. When I was first starting my PhD, no one told me that, so I just sure you turn up to the lab like you did in undergraduate. You do some experiments, you write them up. I didn't even really understand what peer review was, but that is a problem, which now is that reversed way you enter a lab, and I really feel like it got hyper competitive, super competitive, and if you're not publishing about 3 papers at the end of your PhD, it's really sort of frowned upon. And I've even heard people say you should produce 3 papers a year during your PhD, and yeah, it's insane. I'm not sure if that's even possible in an academically rigorous fashion, or whether or not you do genuinely have to gain the system, but the expectations to publish peer-reviewed papers is higher than ever. Some labs out of Hong Kong, I think I heard, PhD students were coming out with like 11 to 20 papers, which is just insane. That's clearly not all their work. That's them getting their name onto other people's paper. That's just a game in the system, as far as I can see, and it's unfortunate reality of academia and modern academia is that the peer-reviewed paper system maybe is a little bit flawed. It can be gamed and people are gaming it. I think there's people care that much about fixing it, but if you start a PhD, you have to be completely aware that these peer-reviewed papers are what determine your career trajectory and success, nothing else. Really grant money. Let's talk about that. So another expectation of PhD student these days is that towards the end of your PhD you will be applying for funding. A PhD is the training ground for academia, but the issue is that academia is largely run, or maybe I can even say heavily rely on, if not primarily reliant on, external funding to do research, and so not only have you got papers, but you need to create. You've also got to start looking for grant funding, and funding is incredibly hard to get, and it's a shame really, because I've seen so many awesome scientists who have done everything well. They have got papers, they've got great track records, they got high H index, but unfortunately they have not able to secure a grant because maybe the research isn't in an interesting area at the moment, and so grant funding along with papers can really dictate the success of your career after your PhD. And also, if you're working for someone whose grant runs out, you will also just run and out of a job. If there is no money, they won't be able to keep you It's just insane. It's a really weird system, but it's a reality of academia and something that people didn't tell me when I went into academia. All of my friends and all of my family, like, wow, you've spent 11 or more years in university. Now you must be, you know, highly sought after and you must be earning an absolute fortune. And the answer is that you just don't like your job security is even less than if you worked in a government or in an industry, and you probably don't even get paid that much either. And yeah, it just doesn't correlate. You expect that if you got to the farthest ends of education, that you are awarded in some way with a permanent job or a job that pays you whatever it is, and it's unfortunately just not the case. So grant funding dictates your career as well as peer-reviewed papers. I wish someone had told me that. And the last thing, the final thing that I wish someone had told me when I started PhD is that it's hard to start something when you don't know really what the end is. There is an anxiety that is really can't explain. It's it's you start a PhD and you have to get this thesis at the end, but it's kind of not like a medical degree or your undergraduate, where after 3 years you jump to these hopes and your pass. It's really heavily reliant on results, on papers, and it's not always clear that you will get them. And so even in your sort of first year is kind of fun because you're learning new things. It's new experience. You're getting paid more than you've ever been paid before to do science. And then at the end of your first year and your second year, and the reality really hits in 2 years' time. I've got to have a thesis, I've got to have novel results to report to impress my peers, and that's where it really gets quite anxiety inducing, just because it's only you that can do that. It's not like you can sit an exam or cram for a test or do anything like that. It's all about continuous persistence. It's about turning up every week, every day, and adding a graph, and that is part of my strategy in the end was at the end of the week I'm gonna have another graph that I can talk about. There's a lot of tiny steps to get there, and unfortunately in PhD land, the end results of getting your thesis and having peer-reviewed papers, you really have to focus on the small steps, like today. I will do this and this, and you need to work towards that goal, and it's incredibly anxiety inducing just because it doesn't feel like there's an end in sight. It doesn't feel like you're ever gonna finish. And I've known of people who have spent about 7 years doing their PhD. I've known of people that spent easily 5 years, because ultimately if you don't have the results, if you don't have new novel interesting ideas, or you haven't contributed to a field of research significantly enough to prove that you're worth of the doctor title and PhD, then you just need to carry on. That kind of not having any strict boundaries, and I think as scientists we really enjoy working towards an exam or goal or thing. You know we've perfected that, but what we haven't perfected is the art of working continuously every day towards a goal where the goalposts just kind of always shift, and that's really challenging. There is a complete mind shift from an undergraduate experience where you turn up to some lectures, you learn some stuff, you sit an exam which you're good at, and you do some lab work, but this is completely new. This is new, such new way of doing things, and also no one really cares about what you're up to in the lab necessarily. So you have to drive your own experience, you have to turn up every day, you have to be persistent, you have to have really great sort of project management skills, and if you don't have them at the beginning, you're definitely going to have them at the end of 3 or 4 years. And there's so much to learn and so much internal motivation you need to have. That is something that was so different to anything I've experienced before, and I even have two sorts of 3 to 4 years. You're not guaranteed to have these results that show you've contributed to the field significantly, and that can be incredibly anxiety inducing, but it's a fun challenge, right? Okay, that's the end of the 5 things that I wish someone told me about before I started my PhD. Let me know in the comments what you would answer that. Let's remember to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so you get all my latest videos, and I hope that you make the right choice before starting your PhD. Take the time to understand the supervisor and the culture you're entering, and you can't go wrong.